Good day and welcome to the IIC webinar on mental health and wellness in the restructuring profession. I'm Natasha MacParland of Davies, Ward, Phillips and Vineberg, LLP, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. This webinar is offered by the IIC Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Committee to promote a more supportive and inclusive culture in our field. We're grateful to have with us today 3 distinguished speakers who will share their insights, experiences, and strategies for fostering a healthier work environment and coping with the challenges and pressures of the insolvency and restructuring practice. This program is not limited to IIC members, and we're pleased to welcome everyone today. Also, in housekeeping matters, this has been approved for professionalism credits, and attendance certificates with the details are available by emailing info@insolvency.ca. So info@insolvency.ca. You will see in the chat that we have provided a link to the book that we're going to talk about later on today. And we invite you to send your questions and comments to us in the chat. We do have a full agenda today, but we will try and get to some questions if time permits. Our first panelist from Montreal is the Honorable Clément Gascon, a former Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, who retired in 2019 and joined Woods as Senior Counsel in the spring of 2020. After a career of more than 17 years in the Canadian judiciary, he returned to the private practice of law. He uses his in-depth experience and expertise to guide and assist parties and their counsel in resolving disputes through arbitration at the national and international level, and acts as a strategic advisor in appellate files in insolvency and restructuring matters in particular. He's also an honorary member of the IIC. Justice Gascon has been open and courageous about his struggle with depression and anxiety and balancing his mental health and his judicial duties. He's been a vocal advocate for raising awareness and reducing stigma around mental health issues in the legal community and beyond. Our second speaker is the Honorable Justice Michele Hollins, a judge in the province of Alberta and a former president of the Canadian Bar Association. Justice Hollins has also been candid about her own journey with mental health and how she overcame depression that affected her personal and professional life. She's been a leader and a mentor in promoting wellness, resilience, and diversity in the legal profession, and has contributed to various initiatives and resources. Our last panelist is Professor Thomas Telfer, a well-known and beloved professor at Western University Faculty of Law and a leading scholar in bankruptcy and insolvency law. Professor Telfer is also the co-editor of The Right Not to Remain Silent, The Truth About Mental Health in the Legal Profession, which I'm holding right here. And that is the link that's in the chat. It's a groundbreaking book that features candid and courageous memoirs of judges, lawyers, and law professors who have struggled with mental health issues. Professor Telfer has been a pioneer in developing mindfulness and mental health education initiatives at Western Law and has facilitated over 120 workshops on these topics for various audiences. Professor Telfer is an academic member of the IIC and a co-editor of the IIC Journal. We're delighted to have them here with us today, and we look forward to hearing their perspectives and stories. Please join me in welcoming them to the webinar. Today, we're going to consider the past, present, and future of mental health and wellness in the legal profession. And we're going to start with Professor Telfer, as his book was the inspiration for this webinar. This remarkable book is divided into chapters, each a personal story written by an individual in the legal profession, including Justice Hollins, focusing on different aspects of mental health in the legal profession, the impact of mental health on professional performance, and strategies for coping and resilience. Since its release at the end of April 2024, the book has sold over 2,700 copies and has been praised for its honest and impactful approach to a topic that has long been considered taboo in the legal community. Professor Telfer, as we seek to learn from the past, how did your mental health struggles affect your personal and professional relationships? And what were some of the barriers or fears that prevented you from seeking help or support?
Thank you, Natasha. And first of all, thank you to the Insolvency Institute of Canada for hosting this important event. If we reflect on the past time, my experience as a law student, I want to share with you because during my time at law school, I never heard the words mental health. In fact, let me take you back to last September. I was invited to speak to the students in first year law at Western. The orientation session was held at the Great Hall, and I was asked to speak on the topic of mental health. I told the students that my orientation session had also taken place at the Great Hall in 1985. So things were very much the same. But what was different in 1985, there was no orientation session on mental health. The lack of mental health education in my law school experience had a profound effect upon me when I was a young lawyer. As a young associate lawyer, I recall not feeling great, couldn't put my finger on what was really going on, couldn't sleep very well. So I went to my family doctor complaining of my symptoms, saying, I'm not really sure what's happening. And after a conversation, he said, you know what? I think you're dealing with depression. I'm going to recommend medication. And I was absolutely shocked. The words really shook me. And I actually said to the doctor, that's not true. I'm not dealing with depression. I recall leaving, rejecting the diagnosis. And unfortunately, I believed all the stigmatizing messages about mental health, and I self-stigmatized. At that time, as a young lawyer, I believed that mental illness was a sign of weakness and I could just get over by trying harder. I know now that that's simply not true. But back then, I was worried that if my law firm found out that I was being treated for mental illness, I would lose my job. No one could know. I never told anyone about my doctor's visit, and I simply dealt with it on my own. And that was the beginning of a long period when depression came and went. And looking back, I know life would have been much different if I had accepted that diagnosis and sought help at that early stage. That's why it's so important to reach out for help when you're struggling.
Thank you, Professor Telfer. Justice Hollins, anything to add?
Well, I'll just set the stage, I guess, in terms of the difference between Professor Telfer's experience and mine, at least the cause. My depression wasn't work related. It came from my kids leaving home, which on the surface probably sounds a bit trivial, but for us, I have twin daughters that I had raised by myself. So it had been just the three of us for many, many, many years. And when they turned 18, I began to suffer from increasing and eventually debilitating depression. And I had no idea why, no idea what was going on. I was completely baffled. So my story is different in that I wasn't so much restricted by the worry about stigma as I was just about not understanding what was happening to me, and so not understanding where to go for help. So I do want, particularly in light of the Sherbrooke report, Dr. Cadu's Sherbrooke report on mental health in the legal profession in Canada, to always make the point when I talk about this, that for me, I wasn't a junior lawyer, I wasn't a student. And so I had the kind of job security and the kind of support among my partners. I was at a very small firm that a lot of junior lawyers may not have. And so my experience, well, internally was certainly very significant and left me unable to really function or work or engage in any kind of social relationships at all. But I've always recognized that I was lucky to be in a place that once I sought help, I could get help.
Interesting. Justice Gascon, what were some of the factors that contributed to your mental health challenges in the past? And did you feel like you had to cope with them in silence? And then just a follow-up question, which is, do you think that there are unique characteristics of the restructuring profession which contribute to mental health issues among insolvency practitioners?
Well, thank you. I think there's a lot in that question, and I'll try to to cover all of the aspect the best I can. Perhaps I could start by relating to what my two colleagues referred to in the discussion, and it is indeed interesting. I think everybody comes to those issues from different angle, different experiences. As far as I'm concerned, I would say that the factors that has always been a strong contribution to my high level of anxiety, which at some point led to episodes of depression, is the perfectionism, the high performer syndrome that has always been present in my whole career, and I came to grips with it. I think it was like, I would say, more than 10 years into the profession, facing challenges, overworked, I guess, very well affected. And this is where I got the first time the diagnosis that, yes, you have definitely chemical imbalance that you need to take care of, take some medication. And frankly, I thought it was just an episode that would go away. I remember when I was first recommended to take some medication, the doctor said, "You're going to take that for life, sir." And I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. It's over time that I got to learn how to deal with this reality, how to learn to put my limits, how to learn to see the signs. But those factors, which I guess are part of my personality, have always been present. And while I'm 65 and they're still present, you simply learn over time how to deal with that. Did I have to deal with them in silence? Frankly, I guess I lived with that for many years without even knowing about it. When I had the first issues, I was already a partner, been the partner for many years. Had the full support of my partners when I faced that. And I think that was quite important, as I had the full support of my peers when I faced further episode in my judicial career. Now you ask me, do I think that there are unique characteristics in the restructuring profession, which is our audience today? I would say for sure, and with big pluses. What we have been able to learn over the recent years, and Justice Hollins referred to her, Professor Kedzier from University of Sherbrooke, who made in-depth analysis within the legal profession in Quebec, then made an even more in-depth analysis at the request of the Federation of Law Societies throughout the country. Clearly, the legal profession is a profession which is more vulnerable to issues of mental health than others. Within that profession, the litigators are perhaps one of the group that is even more vulnerable. And you put those two and face the reality of the restructuring, the insolvency profession. We're looking at a group that is facing tough challenges in terms of matters, high pressure at the maximum in terms of the real-time litigation, the real-time necessity to deal with the reality. So you are basically grouping together high performers, pressures, always in a context of confrontation, or most of the time in the context of confrontation, in an environment where, because of the reality of confrontation, you don't necessarily control the outcome. It's in the hands, for instance, of a judge. And you are in a world, in a legal profession, where there's not always one good answer. There's sometimes more than one good answer. So you have the elements, I think, within the restructuring profession that brings those level of high anxiety, of stress that leads to those issues that sometimes we face amongst practitioners in the legal profession. Now, I think the idea here is not to say that this is a problem, is to say that this is a reality. And once you face the reality, then you are in a position to learn and try to cope with it. And I think what has been great in terms of this dialogue within the legal profession, which is certainly much more present in the last 5 to 10 years than before, is that we can identify, name the problem, which is already, I think, a good part of trying to find the proper solution. But there are definitely characteristics that makes this group perhaps more vulnerable than others. Sorry, I think I was a bit long.
No, that's excellent. I actually thought it was interesting in our prep when you talked about, you could deliver like the perfect work product, the perfect strategy, and still not get the preferred outcome in restructuring. And so it's different than other.
Yeah, you have to. And it's not easy because we're talking about, and obviously, this group, and I must say I've had a number of encounters in my career with this community within the structuring and restructuring profession. Everyone I've seen in that group, they work hard, they're good, they're devoted, they really want to get the proper work done. The problem is that at the end of the day, you can do the perfect work and still not get the result that you want. Now, when you're a perfectionist, an high performer, you often have problem coping with that. And that is something that you have to learn. That's a lesson you have to learn. At sometimes you have to accept and move on. It doesn't mean that you want to do things not 110%, but 75%. That's not what it means. It means that you have to accept that even when you give 110%, sometimes you will not necessarily get the result that you may be entitled to, but that's the reality of that profession, of that group.
It's interesting. So as we move to the present, Justice Hollins, I'd like to start with you. As a contributor to the book, what motivated you to share your story publicly, and were there any risks or challenges that you faced in being so public about your mental health challenge?
I have to say, I don't think so. I've been talking about my experience with depression since a few years after I recovered, and that's 20 years ago now. So I've been on this circuit for quite a while. But certainly at that time, the motivation was to try and combat or address the stigma. Because that was still, I mean, it still is, but at that time, 20 years ago, it was very alive and well. And I think it was actually hearing a friend of mine speak to a group about his depression and anxiety and just realizing how impactful that was at the time that kind of got me started on that. Although the opportunity to contribute to the book has, as I said before we began, really, opened my eyes to the prevalence of mental health issues in the profession, as well as the different stories and the commonalities we have. I mentioned earlier that one of the challenges for me in getting help was not recognizing what was going on with me, because everything in my life was really good at that time. I was a partner, I was productive, I was valued. I had a great client list. I was really enjoying my work. I liked my partners. My daughters were entering their last year of high school, and they had, all kinds of opportunities and scholarships. Things were really, really great. And so even once I finally got to therapy, and it was suggested to me that it was my kids leaving home that was behind this, unbelievable spiral, my first reaction was, well, that's dumb. Of course, my kids are leaving home. I've raised them to, want to take over the world. That was my hope for them. So of course they're leaving home. So then I entered, this period of self-recrimination, so that even once I was, came to understand what was behind it, then I doubled down on myself and criticized my reaction to this, and again tried to sort of just self-diagnose and self-treat, which did not work. I mentioned to you yesterday that the other thing, I'm only going to mention this because this is the weirdest misconception, and I don't know that anyone else would have this, but at the time I did. I didn't go to therapy, not because of the stigma, but because I'd never been to therapy. No one in my family had ever talked about therapy or been to therapy. I believe now that my mother probably struggled with lifelong depression. And I don't think in those days, that was just not, you were a farm person, you did the work, and we didn't talk about those things. My understanding of therapy was that you went with your problem and you said to the therapist, I have this problem and I need you to help me with it. And because I didn't know what my problem was, and then I rejected what my problem was, I didn't think I was ready for therapy. So that was a terrible and costly misperception, because it delayed my recovery for a long time. So I will get to this later, but one of the things I do now is go to regular therapy. Whether, no matter how well I'm doing, I go regularly. I have a therapist. I talk to her all the time. And I encourage people to do this. And they often say to me, well, I wouldn't have anything to talk to a therapist about. And I say, yes, you do. Yes, you do. You just, it's just not top of mind. So anyway, I've had not sort of the direct blowback at any point really from talking about this. Minor blowback, but nothing that I think outweighs the benefit of these conversations.
Certainly we appreciate you being open and candid about everything. It's very helpful. And it's interesting between yourself, Professor Telfer, and Justice Gascon, just that initial rejection of, the diagnosis. I find that interesting. Professor Telfer, how did you find the process of co-authoring The Right to Remain Silent, and what kind of feedback and response have you, I'm saying my question, have you received from the legal community, but from everyone, frankly, after publishing it?
Yeah, first of all, let me just say it was a tremendous experience. Beth Beatty and Carol Dogger, two wonderful mental health advocates, and the other two editors approached me with the idea of the book, and they asked me to contribute a chapter, and I said I would help with editing of the book. Now, I had shared my story a few times before I wrote my own chapter, and it's one thing to speak to an audience, but quite another to put the words in print permanently for everyone to read. And I've published many things, but this was the hardest thing that I've ever had to write. The collection of the 18 chapters is quite remarkable. The sheer honesty of the authors telling their own stories is a true inspiration, and the book is really about hope. And I encourage everyone listening today to purchase a copy of the book all royalties are going to CAMH. LexisNexis yesterday confirmed that the book is a top seller for LexisNexis in 2024. Now, the reception for the book has been tremendous and very supportive. And many of the contributors have spoken on mental health panels. I was recently in Toronto for an OBA event with 3 other co-authors of the book. And I would say the common reaction for anyone who hears me speak or who's read my chapter is to pull me aside privately and say, you know what? I've been dealing with my own mental health issue, and they tell me their own story of their own personal journey. I'd say that's the most common reaction, and that's really the goal of the book, to have more open conversations about mental health. And if one person seeks help because of the book, I think we've done our job. So the project has been tremendous from start to finish. And I think we pulled together all of the chapters in record time, and everyone met deadlines. And it was
Mhm.
a real accomplishment to actually have this book published.
And what I find unique about it is the different perspectives. As much as there's the commonality of the legal profession amongst all the writers, with the exception of the last chapter written by a psychiatrist, I just find it was really helpful to have those very different perspectives and very different voices telling kind of similar stories. But I thought that was quite compelling.
Yeah,
And just for people across the province, the country, CAMH stands for the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. So it's based here in Toronto and does quite a bit of research on mental health and wellness.
yeah, and all royalties go to CAMH. And I must share this story about the initial reaction of the publishing world to our proposal. Was the publisher was concerned whether we would sell enough copies to merit an actual print run, and they initially suggested that we only do an ebook. And we pushed back and said we think it would be a seller, and went out and got confirmed book sales.
Mhm.
We're now having a very successful print run.
Yeah, I would add to that, if I may, Natasha. I didn't write as part of these 18 articles, but I was lucky enough to know of the book before it was published. Beth BT contacted me, asked me if I minded reading the material and give my thoughts about it. And I must say, it's quite an achievement to see this collection of articles of those persons within the legal profession that have the courage to speak about it, to write about it, and this collection of article is, as far as I'm concerned, very unique in terms of a profession, or in this case, a legal profession, and it echoes the reality, and perhaps for our participant, it's important to realize that it echoes the reality that this is an issue that some in the profession face, and there are ways to deal with it. There are solutions. One of the way to the solution is to talk about it. But if I can share perhaps one of the reality that I have often referred to in some of the talks I've given on the issue. I'll say this with respect to I will take the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, I've been asked to speak about mental health by the Chief Justices of Canada, by appellate courts, trial courts, administrative tribunals, arbitrators, law firms, private and public group of attorneys, law societies, law schools. It covers the whole spectrum of the profession, from the law schools to the chief justices. And I know it is perhaps less known, but it is, I think, public. But the the Conseil de la Magistrature has decided, I think, a few months ago, to mandate Professor Cadieux to make a similar study that she has made in the legal profession across the country, to do one in the judiciary across the country. So the reality is not unique, it is present. And I think it is good to see that you have persons that have the courage to participate, like what we have seen in this book. And the reality is there. And I think not to make it like an issue, it's to just face the reality and take it from there in order to find a solution. And I just salute Professor Telfer and all the other authors. It's a great contribution to this mental health issue.
And the one thing about the book too, and you alluded to it, is even the scope. Like it's not just about anxiety and depression, but they talk about grief and eating disorders, and so it's just even the scope of things you might not even have thought fall into the category. Like, so for me, when I read it, that whole chapter on grief, I was like, oh, you're right. That's something we need to be more aware of.
Good.
So just getting back to you, Justice Gascon, and then if you want to weigh in, Justice Hollins, how do you currently practice self-care and mental wellness, and what are some of the strategies or tools that you use and recommend to others? You kind of gotten into it a little bit already, but maybe just talk about what you do day to day.
Well, I guess a lot to do with an answer to this question is so I would say is to know yourself and know your own signs. I have been able, and I'll be honest, certainly not with any kind of perfection, and often with a lot of denial and miscues. But I've learned to know the kind of signs that tells me, hey, wake up and take some measures. Cut lunches, cut sleeps, cut sports, procrastinate, headaches, all these signs that tell me, hey, guy, wake up. If you don't react, the spiral will continue. When I'm good enough to see those signs, I frankly, I try to return to the basics. The basics is to discipline myself to sleep well, eat well, and in my case, because that's the way I evacuate my pressure, my stress, keep on doing what helps me is to go out run, go out bike, go out do some exercise. Everybody has their own ways. That's my way of relaxing and getting an exutoire, a way to get out the anxiety. One of the things that I have also found helpful, and I think it relates to what Justice Hollins said earlier, yes, when you're first told, why don't you consult some specialist therapist? You say, well, I don't need that. How can they? I'm good enough. I'm wise enough. I don't need to be taught anything. And I must say, I relate to what Justice Hollins says. It's very helpful, if only to have a place, a person to whom you can speak clearly and frankly about the issue, which in my case, I don't necessarily find easily, and it's helpful. It's helpful. So those would say the kind of steps that I would take, but I think it starts with something basics that those that have to deal with these issues should know is what are your own signs, what are your own symptoms, and what are your own ways of dealing with it. There's no one size fits all. there's no one unique solution. There are many, and they are adaptable.
Justice Hollins?
Well, I share, excuse me, Justice Gascon's experiences and advice about being in tune with yourself. One of my things I watch for is, excuse me, if I wake up and don't want to get out of bed, do not want to start my day, that's not a good sign. If it's one day, maybe, but if that is a pattern, then that just generally doesn't bode well. I have found the stressors in judging to be very different than those in practice, but they certainly are there. And I sort of generally think of them as the one group is the content of what we see and hear. People can be pretty awful to each other, and seeing that and hearing it every day, definitely there's an impact to that. But the other is the workload and then the conditions under which we're working. And I say that as though we're, you know, in a mine somewhere. That's not it. But you know, particularly coming from private practice, it's a shift. It's a hard shift to go to public service, and to be, you know, desperately wanting your skills to be utilized, to be helping people, right, every day. And you know, it's hard to do, and it's hard to do, number one, because of the workloads, which are just relentless, and because of the ways that such a large system has been built and has grown. And so going to a therapist for me allowed me to, first of all, understand that a lot of my issues around work, and because my depression recurred last spring, and I ended up going back on antidepressants. I'm still on those. But that a great deal of that was coming from my inability to affect change in the workplace, to make it a more efficient workplace. And I just was banging my head against the wall. And so my therapist, and it took a long time to sort of convince me that there might be other ways to think about this job. And there might be other ways to think about my future, which, you know, has been terrifying to me, to think about, you know, well, I don't know, what else would I do, or how can I do this job differently in a way that is better for me? So she's really been helpful. Again, I would recommend, certainly people who've had mental illness recognize the fragility of mental health. And so whatever that is, being attuned to your body, having a therapist, you need to treat your awareness of your mental health in the same way that you treat the other aspects of your health. You know, you go to the dentist, you go to the optometrist, you do all those things to keep yourself healthy. And this has got to be sort of the bedrock of all those things. So I certainly would encourage people to do, as Justice Gascon said, do whatever works for you, but don't neglect it.
Mm-hmm.
That's very helpful. And so, I mean, this is a related question. But one of the purposes of this webinar is to kind of create an inclusive environment and encourage, you know, people to look out for each other, and open those conversations. So what are some of the signs or symptoms of mental health issues that you think we should be looking for in our, you know, friends and colleagues and families?
Yeah, I can start with that if that's okay.
That'd be great. Thank you, Professor Telfer.
So for me, one of the very first signs, as I mentioned from my days as a young lawyer, was not being able to fall asleep at night, and then oversleeping in the morning and not being able to get out of bed. That was a real sign for me. The other thing that is a sign is you lose interest in your usual passions, your hobbies, your extracurricular activities. Those things that were really important to you before become something that's just goes out the window, and you tend to neglect those things. The other thing that really surprised me, and I haven't shared this with many people, but during my deepest depression, I experienced the most intense physical pain that I've ever experienced. And that came as a real surprise to me. It's not like I broke my leg and I had pain in my leg. It was just overall intense pain. And so that really caught me by surprise. And the thing about noticing signs or symptoms of mental health issues, not only is it important to recognize our own signs or symptoms, but also to recognize them in others, your friends or family members. You just notice that things have changed. And it's important to start a conversation with someone and just check in with people to see how they're doing, because you notice they're not themselves, or they're not showing up for work, they're absent. And I think it's important to reach out to others to initiate a conversation because you're noticing signs in other people.
And that's very helpful. Justice
No,
Hollins?
I think if I can add to that, I think it's a very good point that Professor Telfer raises. Yes, there is, I think, a primary responsibility for those that have to deal with mental health issues. And let's face it, it's not everybody, and that's a reality that nobody chooses their illness. You have to deal with the issues that you have, but at the same time, the environment, I think, has a role to play in the sense of being alert to those reality. And I have made the suggestion to sometime think about this question that we ask on almost daily basis to our colleagues, our friends. How are you? Do we sometimes take the time to listen to the question? The question is not how are you, is when you see someone facing those challenges, having those signs, is no, how are you really? Really? And take the time to tell me. Open up the discussion, open up the door so that there be this exchange. I think it is an important part of any solution to come.
Justice Hollins? She might be frozen. Professor Telfer, I think we'll just jump ahead. What are some of the resources or supports that are available or needed for restructuring professionals who are struggling with mental health issues, and how can they access them or advocate for them?
Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there available today, and I can just share with you some of them. But the most important thing is seeking help. The first step really is to tell someone, your partner, a friend, a family member, to have an initial conversation saying, indicating these things are, my life isn't going quite well right now. And having that initial conversation is so significant. So just telling one person to get that rule started. And then if you're really struggling and you believe you've lost hope, and you're dealing with thoughts of suicide, and you're worried about someone else with thoughts of suicide, call or text the 988 Suicide Crisis Helpline, which is now available. And when you reach out to that line, a trained responder will listen without judgment and provide support and understanding, and can tell you about resources that will help. I wish that number had been available to me years ago when I was really struggling. So beyond that, every law society has a member assistance program. And for example, in Ontario, the member assistance program is provided by Homewood Health, and member assistance program is fully independent of the Law Society of Ontario. And that program provides secure online or telephone access to counseling, coaching, online resources, and peer volunteers. Now, the book itself, The Right Not to Remain Silent, has a 20-page appendix listing mental health resources. And I encourage you to go to that appendix. There are listings, national resources, but also listing by province. with each provincial member assistance program listed, their phone numbers and websites. And I encourage everyone to consult that appendix and take the first step and reach out for help.
Great. We're just trying to get Justice Hollins back on. And just to remind people, the link for the book is in the chat, and I do think we might have some time for questions, so I would love to hear some questions from the audience. Justice Gascon, I'm going to change it up a little bit and give you one of the questions that we were going to ask Justice Hollins, which is, what are some of the systemic or cultural changes that you think are necessary to promote mental health and wellness in the restructuring profession?
I do hope that in terms of cultural change and approach, and I'm thinking about perhaps the legal profession more generally, and that includes the restructuring profession. I think we have done a lot in the past years to face the reality, talk about the reality, and be open to the issue. I think I don't think we can ever say that the stigmatization is gone, but I think it is much better in the sense that because of the discussion, because of these studies, because of the analysis, because of this book, now we can realize that it is a reality, but it is a reality with respect to which there are solutions. There are ways to deal with it, and there are ways to progress and continue, notwithstanding. I think that has been, solidly accomplished and is on the right way at the moment. And I see that in terms of a profession like the restructuring profession, the challenges being what to do from a practical standpoint now that we've accepted that, now that we can talk openly about mental health, now that we have law societies, law firms that are sensitive to those issues. What else? What to do in the practical situation? I think in a profession like restructuring, and bear with me, I'm not saying that there are easy solutions to that, but I think there are two aspects, as far as I'm concerned, that has to be better addressed and better worked on. And I think it touches the whole legal profession, as a matter of fact, on these 2 points. The first one, which I think mostly for the younger ones within the group, we have to get the proper place to the mentoring and the support of those experienced colleagues. We've lost a lot with the pandemic in terms of the place of mentoring within our profession, and I'm sure it is the reality in the restructuring profession. This has to be put back much better than it is on the agenda, because it helps solves a lot of the issues having to do with the high anxiety, the high performance, and the challenges that a profession like restructuring faces. The other challenge, which again, I don't necessarily have the perfect answer, but that's the reality. Find a way to disconnect somehow. I'm so often asked, what do you see different in what you used to experience as a young counsel to the reality of today? And I often come back with this example. One reality that at least I had when I was starting in the legal profession more than 40 years ago is whenever I was saying to colleagues, you won't be able to reach me because I will be off in that country or over in that place where there's no connection. That was true. And you were allowed to really disconnect for a few days. Nowadays, it's impossible, but you have to learn to bring some habits, because when we're talking about high anxiety, high performance, the reality is that in this profession, restructuring profession, including, you work with your brain. Like anything, your brain sometimes needs a break. If you don't give it a break, you will have issues. Find the ways to be able to say, no, I'm closing the damn phone, I'm closing the damn, I'm not available, and do it. I think that's a challenge that will require some cultural change to accept. And again, I'm not saying that it's easy. It's not easy. It's not easy, but you have to consider that if you don't find the ways, at some point it will catch upon you and upon your group.
No, that's very helpful, and welcome back, Justice Hollins.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. But, I am going to go a little bit off script, so I hope that, I apologize in advance, but we did get a really interesting question from the chat directed to you. And that was whether you identified challenges that you faced as a woman and a mother that your male colleagues didn't experience.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I will talk a bit about myself, but Dr. Cadou's report, the Sherbrooke report, keyed in, this is phase 1, keyed in on particular demographics, particular groups that were much more affected with mental health issues than others. And probably no surprise, young lawyers, LGBTQ lawyers, disabled lawyers, and women. And particularly when you look at the fact that that report also drew a very straight line between hours requirements and hours expectations and workload and the prevalence of mental health issues. Yes, this is, I always have to struggle here with how much of my feminist legal theory I'm going to dump on people. But, without, and we're getting there, but without a redistribution of labor in the home, it's not fair to tell women, you have to meet these expectations, but still you're carrying, the bulk of the labor within the household. And until those things start to change, I think it's very difficult to say to women, we'll just work harder. My kids, I moved from a big firm to a small firm, and that made a huge difference to us. My daughter is currently at a large firm in Chicago. She has a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and her husband works in a demanding job as well. And she is just in the thick of it. And every time she calls in tears, I remember all of that, of how hard it was. And so there aren't easy answers to those things, but I do think there are 2 changes in the future, right? There's institutional wellness and there's personal wellness. So personal wellness is all the things that you do to be resilient and all the things that you do to stay mentally healthy. But institutional wellness is that kind of institutional change that makes it easier for people to do this job for a long time and to be happy doing it. And because lawyers sell their time for money, the solutions get really complicated really quickly. And so, we've talked about flexible work schedules, different billing models. I think all of those things have a part in the conversation about how we make this profession more healthy, particularly for women. But I will say this, just in closing, is that I've always said the change is going to come from the talent, as it does in most industries. And I think that means that, as important as it is, that, oldsters like us, no offense to my fellow panelists, As important as it is that we talk about these things, I think that the institutional change will come from younger lawyers who are growing up in, thank goodness, in an environment where mental health is a thing and it's a valued thing. And as they understand that and start to draw the kind of boundaries that Justice Gascon was just talking about, I do have hope. I do have hope for change, including for women. Insolvency is tough. It's a transactional practice, right? And so there's just so much that's beyond your control. Yeah, I won't have time to go into my time management speech, which I have subtitled, "No Kid Ever Died from Eating Kraft Dinner." So you get through it.
Could I just add about the future and hope?
Yes, please.
Just looking at the students who have come through my class the last 10 years or so, they're increasingly willing to talk about mental health issues. And I was just at a conference in London in January, and a managing partner of a firm said students are now asking the firms, what mental health resources do the firms have? So they're very engaged in this topic, and so I have a lot of hope for the future with our graduating students.
No, that's great.
Good.
You know, I do, there's one question that's come up in the chat I do want to ask, and we only have about a minute, and I'm going to direct it to you, Justice Gascon, which is, you know, what's the difference between, you know, the normal kind of stress and anxiety that an insolvency practitioner would feel versus something that amounts to, you know, a mental illness, anxiety and depression? But what's the difference?
I think the difference is when it is reaching a point where you're paralyzed by it. We're talking about we're talking about earlier the reality, which I think is certainly present in the restructuring profession, because you have very solid counsel, very competent, but they are all, for the most part, high achievers, high performers. And when you tend to be high achiever, high performer, you sometimes put the goal, the end result at the maximum. And when you put it at a point where you are terrified by for instance, fear of losing, fear of not performing, this is where the situation of your stress and anxiety becomes so overwhelming that it paralyzes you. And that is, I think, the reality that we see in the profession, but it's the reality of a number of high performance reality. You can find the example and emulate to that. And I'll try to be brief on that, but I'm going to give you the example and everybody will understand it. Simone Biles.
The gymnast.
She was gold medal. What did she do 4 years ago? She crashed under the pressure, ended up having a disastrous performance. 4 years after, she came back and stunned the world with gold medals. High performance, the anxiety sometimes paralyzes you, but this example shows you what it can do, but it also shows you that there are ways to rebuild yourself and come back and still be able to do what you are willing and motivated to do. I think that's the way I would complete my answer on this question.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I'm just going to reframe a question that we've gotten in the chat as a statement, which is something that everybody said, which is we really have to focus on being open with younger professionals so that they choose insolvency as their practice area, because just given the intensity of it, we just have to be hyper aware, I think, of the impacts and have those open conversations. Thank you to the question in the chat for that. So we've reached 1:29, so we're at the end of our webinar. I hope that this webinar has been informative and helpful for all of you who have joined today. Our distinguished panelists have shown us that mental health and wellness are not only personal matters, but also professional and institutional ones that require collective action and systemic change. And I certainly am very grateful for your leadership and advocacy in this area. I think we all hope that this has sparked a conversation and a reflection on your own mental health and wellness and how you can foster a healthier and more supportive work environment for yourself and others. We all encourage you to reach out and tell your stories, whether it's to a trusted colleague, a friend, or a family member. You're not alone and your voice matters. By breaking the silence and stigma around mental health, we can create a more resilient and compassionate restructuring community. Thank you for your participation and attendance, and please stay tuned for more webinars and resources from the IIC Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Have a wonderful day and take care. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.